Hello, I'm here with Peter Temin, who is a Professor Emeritus of Economics at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Peter, thanks for joining us this afternoon.
My pleasure.
Now, I've read many of your works, one of which I think has had a lot of important implications for the modern day crisis, which is, of course, Lessons from the Great Depression. But before I get into that, there is another period I'd like to discuss with you, which I know you've written about, and I've always found it a little noticed and discussed element in American history, and that's the 1837 Depression. In the run-up to that, we had a Treasury Secretary and a President who were fanatically paying off national debt, and they finally did so, I think, by 1835.
Yes.
The Treasury then continued to run budget surpluses for another couple of years, Levi Johnson, and then lo and behold, by 1837, we got into a depression which not only finished off Jackson's presidency, but destroyed Van Buren's subsequent presidency.
Yes.
And I thought that had interesting lessons, because this seemed like the classic Tea Party type candidate, and with the anti-government and the debt payoff. So I was wondering what your sense of that period was.
Well, my sense of that period is that, like today, the United States was in an international economy, and the inflation was due largely to the fact that we had been exporting silver to China in a complicated set of transactions. And in the run-up to the Opium Wars, that disappeared, and so the silver stayed within the United States. And then that time in an agricultural economy, more money meant higher prices, and people kept doing that. Now that was exacerbated by the paying off of the debt, which came at the end of a long period, because back in those days you ran up debts during wars and you paid them down thereafter.
But I think that's the first time it was actually paid off completely.
Well, once then, no, it actually wasn't actually paid off completely.
Okay.
No, it was paid off completely, but the payments that were anticipated were not all given because they got caught up in the recession. And we came close to doing it again in the 1880s. Economic historians differ on how important the paying off of the debt was. That there were these international concerns and then there are domestic concerns. And when that happens, it's, of course, rather tangled to find out what's really making causing the economic difficulties. In my view, the international events were primary, that it all had to do with the international movements of gold and the problems with the cotton crop and so on, then to England the other way from China. And it's clear that this was exacerbated by the interbank transfers of money, interregional transfers of money to pay off the debt for that. And people disagree whether the paying off the debt and moving the money around was really disruptive, or whether that was the frosting on the cake, and in fact the difficulties that the United States was having in the world economy would have caused the recession and the deflation and the problems that you refer to, even without the paying off the debt.
Okay, well, let's then move on to the 1930s. Now, yes. In many sense, the political conditions that pertained in the aftermath of the Great Depression are not too dissimilar from what we see today, particularly in the Eurozone. But I think, as you pointed out, at least there was an economic rationale for maintaining tight fiscal policy in the aftermath of the Great Depression, in the sense that you were trying to sustain a gold standard. Whether that was a good proposal or a good idea or not is another matter. But there was you could at least say there was a rationale behind the ideology. Today, it seems to be austerity for austerity's sake, or maybe it's to destroy what's left of the New Deal. I mean, I was wondering what your take on that is.
No, well, my take on it is that's a big question. Mm-hmm. So first of all, when they were adhering to the gold standard, they did have an ideology. And they thought that, in the early 1930s that trying to make the gold standard work was their best option. This was a long-run theory and may work in the long run, but there's a lot of pain in things. But it didn't work in the short run. And so the only practical way with the politics and whatever else was going on was to get off gold, which is how we got to a recovery for that. Now, one can debate whether the gold standard is that good, is good enough to want to maintain it through all the pain that comes. But what we know in the 1930s is that the pain caused extremists to gain in personality, in popularity, as they tend to do in difficult times. And that led then to political instability in some places, and of course the Nazis, and then the Second World War. So that this turned out to be that the gold standard might have worked in the long run if politics didn't exist, if it was purely an economic process. But alas, we live in a world which has both economics and politics. And so the political system wasn't strong enough. Not in the United States it was, in Britain it was, but in Italy it wasn't, in Germany it wasn't, to maintain itself through all the difficulty. And of course, you know, that's, when I say all the difficulty, that's a euphemism for genuine human suffering. Millions and millions of people out of work, millions of people hungry, millions of people around with nothing to do in that case but sell apples. Now people sell little handicrafts and do things. We were in a little restaurant actually here in Toronto, and over by Kensington Market. And since it was a natural food restaurant, and I have a daughter who likes all this kind of stuff, I sent her an email and said a curiosity of it was all done by young men. And I said the economic conditions here may be bad enough that the men are forcing the women out of the low-wage jobs.
Well, well, let me ask you something else about that period in comparison to today. As you've pointed out, in Europe, we had movements, populist movements, largely from the right, certainly in Germany and Italy. In the U.S., we also had some right-wing populist movements, but we also had some movements from the left. I mean, we had Huey Long, amongst others.
Yes.
It's interesting to me that there has not been a comparable form of left-wing populism that has yet manifested itself in the current economic and political conditions. And I'm wondering what your thoughts were on why that's the case.
My thoughts, and this will come back to your question about the Tea Party, is that what is different about that now is the distribution of income. And so you have very rich people influencing what we're doing. The conditions around the country are terrible. People are going for extremist solutions. My take on the current views is that a lot of the grassroots Tea Party people were really up for grabs. They could have gone to the right or to the left. They were going for some colorful extremist kind of thing, or something populist as used by economists as people who promise instant gratification. And so they would go for that. But in this current view, current situation, unlike in the 30s, you have very rich people, the so-called 1%, but it's even the 0.1%, who are very influential and have been allowed by the Supreme Court to influence politics. And so they have convinced these people to go for a right-wing solution. And that is consistent with, I think, to come back to your even earlier question, with some things that are happening in Europe, that the political ferment that comes from these poor times are being harnessed by some rich people to try to dismantle the New Deal and the worker protections and a bunch of things that were started in the 1930s, increased under Johnson in the 1960s, and were the way my generation grew up, but they're going. And I think that is happening too in Europe.
Yeah.
And we don't know, again, the balance of forces. We don't know how it's going to work out in the United States. But in the United States, the Ryan budget that came through totally eviscerates what we think of as the welfare state. And
that's a budget proposal which he also, I think, introduced in the campaign, which is to balance it within 10 years and effectively, quote-unquote, reform Medicare and Social Security, but really, as you point out, actually cut what's left of it. Mm.
Yes, that is. And I think that the notion of paying off the debt is not serious. It's just a mantra to run off of for that. But I think the real aim is to get rid of all of these safety net provisions of all different sorts. I think the fallacy of that, I mean, there are any number of fallacies on human grounds, but I think the real fallacy of that is that our current troubles appear mild relative to the Great Depression because we did have a safety net. Mm-hmm. We had unemployment insurance, Social Security for some people, Medicare for that. Obama has expanded the medical aspect of that for many people. And if you take that away, then our politics is going to get much more volatile because when we hit hard times, these people will actually be like those people in the 1930s. The Okies going off to try and find something for the Dust Bowl, the people in the cities selling pencils and apples and so on. And that's going to lead to political instability. And you don't know where that's going to end.
And historically, that, as you say, that's what we didn't have that last. We had that last time because we didn't have the social welfare safety net, and in a sense, the danger, of course, is if we cut that, then we end up in this H.G. Wells type of dystopian future where you've got a few celestial Eloi who govern, and the cave-dwelling Morlocks that comprise the bulk of us, or even something as dystopian as what we have in Latin America, where you have wealthy private individuals in their private sector ghettos, private security forces driving around in bulletproof limousines to prevent their children from being kidnapped.
Yes, well, I think we are going in that direction, and Thomas Piketty has done us a great service by publicizing the thing about inequality. I wrote about it 8 years ago or so, and so on, and other people have been talking about it very much. It's now gotten to be very popular. What we are doing is really, in a sense, using the wealth of the United States to enrich these people, and these people turn out not to be at all generous toward the rest of the people. And as the dinner speaker last night said,
John Ralston Saul.
John Saul said, there are always choices. And so these are choices that these people are making. And what they seem to be going for is a kind of Latin American situation. I should emphasize that Latin America is changing.
It's trying to go in the other direction.
different countries are doing things, so that this is a kind of excess simplification to say. So let me say a developing world kind of thing, where you have the very rich and the very poor, and not very much in the middle. The Romans had that too, so it's not a unique setting to our kind of situation. But what it does do is it makes for a very rotten economy over time, as you can know from looking at these developing economies. It turns out, and this is what Mr. Saul was saying with the Robert Owen example, was that there is another choice, and if you run a kind of more egalitarian system thought of as being some of the Northern European countries, so on, it's actually good for everyone. and it's actually more profitable for the rich. It's better, obviously, for the poorer people, and it's a much better society. The mechanics of that are that, as you say, you live in gated communities and so on, but you can't run a good business where you don't trust anybody. Mm-hmm. And so consequently, when people are running businesses, they can only delegate kind of easily observable, simple things to people because they don't trust them to do anything, and the people are poor and maybe will go off. So you can't progress into the kind of technology and interests that have characterized the United States since the Second World War. Whereas if you do pay people well and the workers are loyal to the company, then it's a cooperative arrangement. Not as cooperative as there is in Japan, but still cooperative here, and enough that people are working toward the same aims. And so when the workers identify with the company, they do better work. And every economic study has shown that if you have more worker, have higher wages, more worker attachment, lower turnover, better labor relations, and higher productivity.
And in fact, that's certainly been the case, for example, in the Scandinavian countries.
Yes.
In the United States, in the 1930s, there were some business leaders, such as Bernard Baruch, who recognized that, and I think recognized that, if you gave up more of the pie or shared more of the pie, that ultimately
yes.
would create a more sustainable, long-term model. Where are there any modern day Bernard Baruchs who have that more profound understanding of their own self-interest?
Well, they're not as influential as Bernard Baruch and so on. And if you think about the period of the 30s, it's not really till the war that you get it. The unions were bitterly fought by the automobile industry. And but in the war, we all had a common goal, and so then everybody worked together. Today, you have individual companies that do well. And so just one of them I happen to know a little bit about is Costco. Seems to be, it's in competition with Walmart, who lives off the bottom feeding, and letting people be on welfare and Medicare and Medicaid and be supported by the government and just giving very small salaries, as Costco, which tries to be respectable to its employees and give them a decent wage and some stake in what they're doing. And they seem very nice, and the company seems to be doing very well. And so there are these two ways that one could go, but you don't see much discussion of that outside a few specialized people. They're drowned out by the rhetoric of the Tea Party and then the Democratic Party, which is in such a panic about that they can't articulate a counter
narrative.
Counter-narrative.
Yes, that's right. It's depressing, actually, and as you say, hopefully it won't take another Great Depression for us to get that change of thinking, and that more people will start to embrace, or even indeed a great war to get us back to that point. We've run out of time, but Peter, I want to thank you very much for this. Has been a great discussion, and I hope I'll get a chance to follow up with you again in the future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.